But there was one news item that really struck me and that I really puzzled over a lot while I was out. And that was the untimely death of former Zappos CEO Tony Hsieh in a house fire when he was just 46 years old. Now, Hsieh was a celebrated visionary, became rich in his 20s off a digital advertising startup, and then he became a billionaire with an investment in Zappos that eventually led him to lead the company. Hsieh was in many ways the perfect embodiment of the mold-breaking Silicon Valley ethos. Unlike Jeff Bezos, whose desire to please the customer was at the cost of making his own workers miserable, Hsieh really sought happiness and harmony for all. He hated hierarchy and he had a passionate obsession for community. I actually met Hsieh back in 2013 in Las Vegas. I was with MSNBC at the time, and I was really fascinated by the admirable idealism embodied in his desire to completely remake the rough downtown area. He used Zappos itself as a sort of transplanted community upon which to build that revitalization. Now, Tony didn't want to just bring in developers and create a bunch of upscale condos for the affluent. He wanted his revamped downtown to have a real heart and soul for the human beings there, to have a real connection to each other. He and a bunch of his people all moved into a condo building where he hosted brainstorming sessions and big parties in his jungle-themed party room. He sat for an interview and showed us around the little sprouts of development still in the early stages of formation then. There's a robotics company, a funky clothing boutique, a breathtakingly delicious restaurant, and insanely ambitious plans. I remember my producer and I puzzling over it. Could you grow an actual community in such an intentional and inorganic way? What was the real source of Tony's lifelong quest and zeal for finding happiness and connection? And then, too, there were questions about the atmosphere itself, which felt, frankly, a bit cultish in a way that's not uncommon for the rich and for the famous. Forbes wrote an in-depth article of Tony's final months before his death in that house fire, and all of the little question marks in my mind at the time seemed to have erupted into full-blown crises. Tony's investments in downtown Las Vegas did transform that area, but he apparently didn't find in it the satisfaction or the answers that he was looking for. He moved then to Park City, Utah, with another grand plan to remake the downtown, retreating into heavier drug use and increasingly sycophantic friends, all of whom happened to be on his payroll. Forbes recounts how the singer Jewel, longtime friend of Hsieh, was so distressed by what she saw on a trip out to see him in Park City that she left abruptly, sending him a letter with a dire warning. She said, "I'm going to be blunt. I need to tell you that I don't think you are well and in your right mind. I think you're taking too many drugs that cause you to disassociate." She continued, "The people you are surrounding yourself with are either ignorant or willing to be complicit in you killing yourself." 3 months later, and Hsieh was dead. Now, it's not at all clear that Tony Hsieh wanted to die. His death was, in fact, ruled unintentional. Nor is it clear, though, that he was entirely committed to living. Like so many Americans struggling with mental health issues and addiction, quarantine hit Tony really hard, depriving him of some of the frantic activity that he had used to fill the hole for years. The Wall Street Journal reported that he had become obsessed with depriving his body of all of the essential elements of life, everything from food to sleep, even to oxygen. Indeed, the night of his death, he had brought a heater into a shed in order to reduce the level of oxygen that was in the air. When the fire started, emergency workers couldn't get into that shed in order to save him. One described him as being barricaded inside. Now, what does it say about a society that someone who has achieved everything we're told to achieve in order to have that happiness, have that fulfillment, is so deeply miserable that they spend their days just trying to numb themselves? A celebrated young billionaire obsessed with happiness and finding none of it in the places that we are all told to look. In The Power of Myth, Joseph Campbell tells Bill Moyers that you can tell what a society really values, what they worship, by which buildings are built to the greatest heights. In some societies, it was the palace, the seat of government power. In others, it was the temple, the seat of religious power and observance. In ours, it's the towering skyscrapers of corporate America and of Wall Street. That is the real religion and the real seat of power here. Tony, having risen to the greatest heights of business power as a young man, glimpsed the horrible truth that all that success and money offered zero answers to the deepest needs of humanity. And so he struggled and failed to find meaning, purpose, happiness somewhere, anywhere that he could. In a society so enamored with hollow consumerism, vanity, and money, there was none to be found anywhere that he looked. I don't care what the stock market says, or GDP growth, or the unemployment rate for that matter. And the truth is, although we desperately need a vaccine and stimulus checks, it's not enough to really heal what ails us either. Look at the depression, the anxiety, the addiction, the suicides, the collapse of community, the rise of conspiracy, and the petty, hate-filled squabbling day after day. This nation has lost its soul, and Tony Hsieh is just the latest of millions of casualties to the empty void that's been left. And Sagar, this is such an unbelievably tragic and sad story. And I think it says so much of us about this society that the very people that we lionize and elevate oftentimes are so miserable, that the values that we've put at the center of our society are so deeply unfulfilling that even the people who most greatly embody like those achievements can still be so deeply unhappy.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, I was like you. I was always fascinated by Tony. For years, I was like, hey, who is this guy in Vegas? And doesn't hire people because they don't fit the company culture. And some of it sounded hokey. And yet, people always assured there was a lot more like what he was doing in Vegas. And more friend of the show, actually, Wes Yang, he tweeted this after his death. He said, Hsieh's case in an instructive one. Given infinite means to pursue happiness, attract friends, have artists, musicians, intellectuals play court with you, would you be able to construct an alternate reality of living more satisfying than the conventional ones? And the answer is no, right? It turns out that what we've always valued for centuries, family and community and connection and pursuing something other than happiness for the sake of happiness or just more consumption for the sake of consumption. Tony was worth over $700 million. And if there was a way that money was going to buy happiness, the guy probably would have figured it out. Yeah. But it didn't happen. And at the end of his life, he was pursuing all this dissociative means. I read some of his stuff. Apparently, he was obsessed with fire, where some people are worried that, this might have been a thing. Apparently, thousands of burning candles surrounding him. So it just clearly on a downswing. And the pandemic destroyed much of his life because it was moored in a reality built around partying and the pursuit of just enjoyment for the sake of enjoyment. And I think it's a great indictment of Western culture.